Hi there, welcome back to the Painted Lady Coaching. I'm Amanda Douglas, and I am your healing bestie, ready to help you alchemize your trauma and have happier, healthier, thriving relationships. In this video, we're going to be talking further about manipulation tactics that narcissists will often use within relationships. We understand a little bit of how the narcissistic abuse cycle works and the fact that narcissists use psychological manipulation and emotional control as a means of leverage over the people close to them. And again, they manipulate to maintain power, control, leverage, superiority, and it's often to protect their fragile ego or their underlying insecurities. So let's get into it. All right, so what are some of these manipulation tactics exactly? So I know I've kind of touched on some of this a little bit, but again, I just wanted to dig a little deeper and kind of go more in depth. So the first one is gaslighting. I feel like most people understand this one. They basically use this tactic to distort your perception of reality, and it causes their said target to, of course, question their own reality and to doubt their understanding of things and their memory and their sanity, really. Which they'll also use this to basically deny things that were maybe said and done within the relationship, and they'll just kind of make you feel like you're overreacting or like you're misremembering things. Which what this does is essentially just kind of make you reliant on the narcissist for your memory, which they want you reliant on them completely. This will leave the target often feeling just kind of like disoriented, confused, and they kind of just don't trust themselves or their memory. It's such a doozy, and especially if you're like me and you've kind of just been exposed to this type of person, especially with having a parent that was this type of person, and you also are like a diagnosed neurodivergent. It's a trip. It is an absolute trip. Because it's like you also know that you've had people like use your memory against you, I'm for certain. So it's like, I don't even know who I trust here. Like, it's a doozy. And then love bombing, so this one's fun. Not really, but this will happen in the initial stages, like the very first stage typically. And it's interesting, I was actually having a conversation with a friend about love bombing earlier today. They will use like showering you with like attention and like material stuff like gifts, money, or whatever, and this kind of just creates a false sense of like security and connection like in the beginning. And they may say things like, oh my gosh, you're my soulmate, and like, I've never met anybody like you, and I'm gagging. And just some other things as far as like material stuff, like they will often just, be willing to spend a bunch of money that maybe would 100% be inappropriate, like otherwise, especially that early on in the relationship. Maybe future faking, you could see that a lot. I know that kind of happened to me because I was very expressive about like my dreams and my goals and all of that fun stuff. And my ex definitely kind of created this illusion that he was somebody that had goals that were aligned with mine. And also I talked about wanting to travel a lot and like move around to other places, like New York being one of them. Like I've always loved the idea of at least spending a little bit of time in New York City, just because I'm such a fan of that city. And even like Denver, Colorado, one of the other places that I just adore and have always dreamed about. But at that point, I had never been to Denver, but it was like one of the things that I'm just like, I just think I want to experience it somehow. They talked a big talk and kind of just created this false image of what the relationship could be when they had absolutely zero intention of leaving that area that we were in. And the thing is, he had lived in that area his whole life. He had no intention of like actually leaving. Even if he did talk a big talk and maybe to some degree wanted to, I think he, all in all, had no intention of doing the things that I expressed that I wanted to do. And it's like later on in the relationship, like all of that stuff that I talked about wanting to do for a potential career, especially with traveling, and with wanting to see all these different places, were suddenly a problem. Even though it's like I walked into that relationship with that desire. So with this, like, you know, you're just extremely flattered and you're drawn in and you're absolutely just enchanted. Which makes it really difficult to like kind of see some of the red flags as they come up. And it's often a bit down the line, like when you do start to see them. So then of course after love bombing, we do get into the whole devaluation phase. And so this is when like the belittling and the criticizing to undermine your self-esteem, that's when that starts to pick up gas and get going. And this can kind of range from like subtle put downs or like jokes to overtly rude comments, and it's usually just, yeah, always just targeted at like the victim's intelligence, their appearance, or perceived worth. And it's kind of a way just to kind of keep you confused and looking to them for validation and approval. Oddly enough, I feel like for me, I just never really felt like I needed someone's approval or validation, and I feel like that's why he had such a trip with me, is because I'm just like, bro, what? Like, if that's how you feel, why are you with me? And I would just challenge it so much, and yeah, it never went well. Usually ended in yelling and more put downs and then triangulation. So this can happen when like they'll often bring, like, the narcissist will bring a third party into the mix just to create some kind of like jealousy, competition, or insecurity, which would be along the lines of comparing to an ex or friend or a family member just to make you feel less than. And that can also look like spending time with other people more as just a way to kind of get you to compete for the narcissist and their approval or their time or attention. I've also particularly seen this with like people who are like serial cheaters. It can definitely present itself in a few ways, but I don't really think that I saw too much of this myself in my own experience, but it is a common one. And then I've even seen like in, you know, with friends of mine in their relationships with people that exhibit, you know, toxic traits, that's something that they'll do. And especially because, you know, they had cheating tendencies as well. And then projection, that's another one. The narcissist will basically take their own behavior and accuse their said target of doing it as a way to divert attention. Like accusing the victims of like cheating or lying when really they're the ones doing it. I often say that one narcissist's accusation is really their confession. And the thing is like the one that I was with, I was often accused of cheating and looking for attention when that was simply not the case at all. Like one time I was with them in the car and we were headed somewhere, and they were starting to get very irritated and riled up because they were just like, did you move the seat? Was someone in here? Somebody must have moved this seat. And I'm just like, nobody was in this car. He's like, no, somebody moved this seat. Who was in here last? I was like, you, bitch, 3 days ago. Nobody was in here because you cut me off from all my friends and people anyway. So who else? So things like that would happen, and it just kind of made me like, are you like low-key like up to no good because of the fact that you accuse me so much of it with literally like no rhyme or reason? I'll never know, and that's fine. But it is a very real thing that happens, that narcissistic individuals will often accuse their partners of things that they are actually doing. So it's wild, but yeah. Whenever like you are being accused of a person like of that profile, like when you're being accused of something that literally makes no sense to be accused of, I'd keep that in mind. But again, it's like the whole idea around this is just to kind of keep you like confused and defensive and just like, what the fuck, when they're just kind of avoiding accountability. And another one is silent treatment. Often when you do something that they don't like or approve of for whatever fucking reason, they'll withdraw communication. Sometimes attention or affection or like whatever the hell, just like stonewalling, just to kind of create a sense of like emotional abandonment. And this could be like ignoring cellular communication. It could just be acting overall like cold and distant and just refusing to engage in conversation without explaining. And this often just kind of makes you desperate or anxious for reconciliation and will leave you trying to just like apologize for like whatever you did, even though like you're not really at fault for anything. This happened quite a few times just within like my relationship with said person. And one of those times was just for asking to hang out with some mutual friends of ours. I did mention this earlier, future faking, when I was discussing the whole love bombing. And what this is basically just making like false promises to the future, like to keep the victim hopeful and committed and with no intention of follow through. And that could be changes like moving in together, getting married, or just general life changes that will probably never materialize. And this is a way of kind of just keeping said victim in the relationship and just kind of holding on to hope from the narcissist. And this was definitely like done quite a handful of times in my own, especially with talks about moving back home to Florida, especially with other things that I feel like I'm just struggling to remember because it was a while ago at this point. But I know that was definitely one of the ones that I was just like, yeah, it's definitely not happening. So now I kind of want to touch on some of the more like subtle or maybe less noted forms of manipulation, now that I've talked about some of the common ones. One of them is being cognitive empathy, which is how a lot of covert narcissists get away with being covert. It's different from like emotional empathy because while they may they appear to understand people's emotions, but especially with intimate partners, it's often used as like a way of weaponizing that information so that way they can manipulate you. Like an example that I could probably give like from my own personal experiences is when we first started like talking, I was quite vulnerable with things of like my past and even things that I've like kind of like admitted that, you know, maybe were mistakes and not actually truly aligned with myself, but you know, I've come to understand like, you know, what that really is and like what that represented for me in my life and what I learned from it. And they seem to be like very cool and understanding about it until like later on when, you know, something was going down, it was used as a way to hurt me with that information and put me down and make me feel bad. So in the moment, you may feel heard and validated, but then it's just, yeah, things get used as ammunition against you later. So then there's hoovering, which we put it here because this is quite likely to happen, and I feel like it's maybe a little less talked about, but I would say it may or may not happen, but it is very likely. This usually occurs after like a period of separation within the narcissistic abuse cycle, when the narcissistic individual will try to lure you back in, which can be either a bunch of promises or guilt tactics or both, if you're like me, who heard both. Because mine was making all kinds of promises to change while also threatening to kill himself, so there's that. They may send like messages that will have like significant meaning to you and them. They'll maybe apologize for past behavior. They'll claim that maybe they've changed or like they're going to change. Also like the crisis situations, like faking an emergency. Like I said, mine threatened to kill themselves a few times like during this like Hoover stage when they had never done that before, ever. So this again brings another like intense cycle of emotions, especially if you're someone like me who kind of had both, like, the loaded promises, but also was guilted a lot and all of that fun stuff, especially because I was the one that left. You kind of get into this whole like very terrified and terrifying situation, and also feeling hopeful in moments, but then you're just like, nope, this is all an elaborate emotional manipulation scheme. So then there's also smear campaigns. This can happen within the relationship and definitely certainly like after as well. They'll like suddenly spread rumors or lies or like twist and contort maybe like a half-truth or whatever. And they'll do that to like friends, families, coworkers, just to damage the reputation of the person that they're with. And they may do things like claim that like they're crazy, unstable, or like difficult, or maybe the actual abuser, just in order to isolate them and gain allies and flying monkeys and whatnot. You'll often, if you are in this situation, you'll find yourself like alienated and just kind of confused. But I do know that like once I left the relationship and people that had reached out to both of us, it's a lot of like, oh, well, I heard from him that this is what really happened. And I'm like, no. I would hear from different people depending on how closely I like maybe knew them. I feel like it was a lot more elaborate of a story the less I knew the person. And now while we were together, like I don't know if that was going on as much, and I'm almost willing to believe that it was, simply because of the fact that there was like subtle conflict that was going on between me and some of his family members, and like I had no idea why. But it's like nobody was really willing to talk to each other, and like people would just want to talk to everybody but me, and they would just want to talk through my ex. So really I had no idea what was actually going on. And I'm someone who's willing to go and confront people and talk to them myself, and it's just like either it was just really weird and awkward, or he would just be like, oh, like I wouldn't bother. So I'm just like, okay, I really don't have a leg to stand on here. I don't have any skin in the game here. I don't. And then there's feigning victimhood, which kind of, can play into some of the previous things that I just mentioned. They'll often just play themselves as the victim in order to gain sympathy from other people, and will sometimes even claim that like the person that they targeted is the abusive one, and accuse them for mistreatment and neglect, which was certainly the narrative when I left. And then it was kind of funny. It's like when there was a certain point when we were speaking again after I left, and he just kind of realized that I was just done with him again. He's just like, well, you leaving and just being neglectful, like that's no longer gonna be the story. I'm like, that's crazy. That's absolute craziness. So it's like, yeah, you've been intentionally telling people that I'm just somebody who just up and left you and neglected you, even though it's like, I told you why I did everything and I just didn't leave you without a word. He was also just telling people I have no idea why she left, when I wrote a novel length message as to why I was leaving this person. This kind of creates just a sense of like confusion all in all, and feeling like your very valid concerns are just kind of being like dismissed or kind of written off, and like you're the crazy one or something, or like you're the one who's just making this up or exaggerating, while the person who was a goddamn nightmare is just garnering sympathy from everyone. And also breadcrumbing. They kind of just give you the bare fucking minimum and just like enough to seem like the relationship is fulfilling, even though like it isn't. And it's just enough to kind of keep you hooked. What was once like love bombing becomes breadcrumbing, and like, you know, the super intense like gestures and attention and gifts and whatever the hell. It just now becomes like just random here and there texting, or the occasional sweet gestures as opposed to it was like more grandeur in the beginning, and like seldom moments of kindness. And it's like usually just enough to kind of have you hold on to the idea like, well, maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. Maybe it's okay. Maybe things will improve. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's fine. And then induced dependency. This one's a bitch. It's all a bitch, but so is this one. The narcissist, basically, like, what this is like they slowly kind of just make you dependent on them, whether it's like emotionally, financially, or socially, and that's all just to kind of have like the upper hand and like control over you, which will often like discourage you from like, you know, pursuing whatever like kind of career it is that you want, or like they'll isolate you from like friends and family, or try to take control over your finances. And I will say, for me, they managed to get everything except to my finances. And then it's like, once I realized they were trying to kind of start to get their hand into that, I was like, no, yeah, I think it's definitely time to dip. The idea is to kind of get you as cut off from everything, so you feel like you can't survive without them, and it makes it a lot harder to leave. And then on the other side of that, there's also like the learned helplessness as well, where it's like weaponized incompetence, I think is maybe like the better word for it. Weaponized incompetence, it's just like, you know, they're like, oh no, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. You gotta do it for me. And especially like cooking, that was like one of the ones, like cooking and cleaning. I seldom got any kind of actual help for that. And even like the cooking thing, you're just like, oh, well, I can't do any of that stuff. Can you teach me? And I'm like, I might as well just do it myself if I have to teach you too, even though you spend hours a day on YouTube learning video game stuff, which you also spend like hours doing. I'm like, hey, look, I'm not knocking anybody for spending time on YouTube or playing video games, but the fact of the matter is just if you wanted to, you would. And when it's like already like a lot just to kind of do these things, like you're not making it easier on me to also give me another task. And I think most people can understand that. Just in contrast, okay, it's like, you know, I'm married now. I have a wonderful, lovely, hell of a husband. And he wasn't really much of a cook, like coming into this relationship, but he typically made breakfast for himself. And because it was like just him, like he would often just either like get takeout, or like he would kind of just, you know, get individual meals that you pop in the oven, like from our local grocery store, and that's, you know, good enough for him. But it's like, once I came into his life, he started to take the initiative, especially because for me, like, it is mentally a lot on me, especially when it's like, you know, I'm, like I said, I'm a neurodivergent and I'm a period haver, so it's like your neurodivergent symptoms can often be like increasingly worse around certain times of your period, and it's like it often just shows up like physically. And it's like I also have like very bad periods, like even to the point where I'm like vomiting my entire first day. So it's like there's not a whole lot I can do. My husband took it upon himself to kind of learn to cook some dishes here and there. And the thing is that I've always said is like, look, if you can read, you can make food. Like, you just need to read a recipe and also just go on YouTube, and that can also be super helpful too. I don't cook as much as I was like in my previous relationships, and like he's killing it, my husband, and he loves it, and I think he's quite great at it. And a lot of the times he also would just watch what I'm doing and ask questions about what I'm doing. So that way it's not like I'm totally focused on teaching him, but I'm still able to do what I'm doing and it's not a hindrance. Whereas if I'm just taken the time to teach you and having to stop what I'm doing just to teach you. But he's like very good at just watching and observing and taking in the information, which I feel like is really all you need to do with that. Oh, and then blame shifting, right? The narcissist consistently shifting blame, basically, for their behavior onto said target or external circumstances. So, like, say if like the narcissist cheats, it'll usually be something egregious like, you know, well, it was because you weren't giving me enough attention or something ridiculous, which, you know, whatever it may be, you internalize the blame and you just start to believe that you're the problem, which is again just further manipulation and control. So what all of these just do over time is just like erodes at your self-esteem and a sense of like diminished self-worth, and you just kind of feel powerless and question your reality all in all. And the cycles of abuse and the brief periods of affection, it just kind of creates a bond that just kind of makes it hard to leave, despite the majority of the time that is an absolute hellscape nightmare. So this can also just have other health implications, anxiety and depression and complex trauma, which like those previous two can just be byproducts of the complex trauma, and you just have like a difficulty trusting people when trying to engage in new relationships. And I know like kind of a random thing that I felt was like unexpected for me was I briefly developed like a type of agoraphobia, and that's like the best way I know how to describe it. But it was like I was kind of afraid to leave the house for like a certain amount of time, or like go a certain amount a distance from the house that I was living in after I left my ex, because I realized while I was living with my ex, I really just couldn't get any time to myself. So it's like if I wanted to go to say like Hobby Lobby or Target by myself while they were, you know, working, I just wouldn't tell them, which, you know, in an ordinary safe relationship, it's like, you know, like right now, like with my husband, I like have no issue tell him where I'm going. He has no issue telling me where he's going. And like, you know, for safety reasons, it's good to let people know where you're going, especially your partner that you live with. I was just not allowed like to go anywhere without them, or else like I would get an earful and I would be lectured how like the world isn't safe, like you're not safe and yada yada. So again, it's like then you just kind of internalize that and you believe that, you know, you have to either depend on them or you're just not safe anywhere at all. But the thing is like I just kind of like developed this like, oh god, I gotta get back before somebody knows that I'm not at home, and then I get yelled at, and then I get questioned, and then people are suspicious of me, and when really I just wanted to go to fucking Starbucks and Target and Hobby Lobby. And then I realized like after I was even removed from that situation, I still felt like that, like for a while. Like I just developed a type of agoraphobia where I was just afraid to go out of the house, or at least just a certain distance or for a certain amount of time before like I would just start getting panicky. Unfortunate. So the best way to protect yourself is of course to just start to recognize the signs and learn them so you can identify them early, and to trust your intuition. If something feels off, then it probably is. So just pay attention to the signs no matter how subtle they might be, and don't be afraid to set your boundaries ever. Okay, make it clear that certain behaviors won't be tolerated and follow through with your consequences. I did make a video on boundaries, so when setting your boundaries, make sure you are using your I statements and that it is about you and not the other person. So if this said behavior continues, then I will do this, and stand on your shit. Stand on your shit. And if you don't, you better see me looking at you like this in your head, okay? And then also, as I've said many times before, seek support. Your support systems are so important. Talk to your friends, talk to your trusted family members, and, you know, professionals that can help you, whether it's a therapist that you're working with or a coach. They'll help you see the situation more clearly. If you are dealing with a narcissist or you're just working on healing from the narcissist, also just focus on detaching your emotions from the narcissist and understand that their behaviors are about them and not you. So understanding these tactics are definitely one of the first steps to freeing yourself from narcissistic abuse. Knowledge is power. It's definitely okay to walk away when you are no longer comfortable or feeling safe. Healing is more than possible, and healthy love and a thriving life is very possible. And definitely tap into your resources, books, support groups, therapy, coaches like myself, any kind of useful information on narcissistic abuse recovery. And just as a reminder, I am a relationship and narcissistic abuse recovery coach, and I have one-on-one coaching sessions, and you can check the description down below or DM me for a free consultation and we can see how we can work together. And aside from all of that, I'm glad you're here. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.